What if I told you that the biggest reason you're not achieving your goals isn't lack of motivation, talent, or even time? It's your habits. Right now, small habits you repeat every single day are silently shaping your future. A few tiny actions, almost invisible, are either pushing you towards success or quietly pulling you away from it. And here's the shocking part. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. In today's episode, we're diving into one of the most powerful ideas about personal growth, how tiny changes can transform your life, your productivity, and even your identity. This is the life-changing wisdom behind Atomic Habits. Hello, everyone. Hi, all. Welcome to Book Podcast Zone. I'm your host, Emma.
And I'm John. It's really fantastic to be here with you today.
We are so incredibly thrilled to have you with us as we embark on, well, what is arguably one of the most practical explorations we've ever done because, we all have things we want to change about ourselves.
Right. And today we're looking at the ultimate blueprint for doing exactly that. The material we're analyzing today it's just incredibly rich.
It really is. We're looking at a comprehensive production plan, a complete roadmap originally designed for a series called Atomic Habits Unlocked.
Yeah, and the source document, it meticulously breaks down the entire framework, chapter by chapter, concept by concept. But what makes this material so compelling isn't just the theory.
No, not at all.
It's the sheer mechanics of human behavior.
Yeah.
It's the actual nuts and bolts of how we operate.
Exactly. And our mission for today is to extract those core mechanics. The source outlines what it calls the 4 laws of behavior change. But look, we aren't just going to read you a summary of those laws.
Yeah, it would be pretty boring.
Right. We are going to translate these psychological and neurological principles into practical, actionable strategies, things that you can apply to your daily routine by the time this conversation is over.
And that translation from theory to practice, that's where the magic really happens.
Yeah.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason so many of us struggle to change our lives is that we fundamentally misunderstand how change works.
We really do.
We treat personal growth like a lottery ticket. We want the instant payout. We want the dramatic, cinematic, overnight transformation.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think a really good analogy perfectly sets the stage here. Building habits is remarkably similar to building a financial investment portfolio.
Oh, absolutely.
If you take a single dollar, right, and put it in a jar on your desk today, you aren't going to be rich tomorrow.
You're definitely not.
You aren't going to be rich next week. It feels completely insignificant. But if you systemize that behavior and you leverage the mathematical power of compound interest by investing a little bit over decades, that tiny daily contribution transforms into massive life-altering wealth.
It does.
We are talking about doing the exact same thing, but with your behaviors, your routines, and ultimately your identity.
Financial compounding is a mathematical reality that we universally accept, right? But we often completely ignore the fact that behavioral compounding is a psychological reality too.
You just don't see it the same way.
We don't.
Yeah.
And these 4 laws of behavior change, they're essentially the instruction manual for how to guarantee those micro behaviors actually stick around long enough to compound.
So let's dive right into part 1 of our source material. This covers the fundamentals, specifically compounding and identity. The entire framework is built on this bedrock concept called the aggregation of marginal gains.
Yeah, that's a brilliant term.
And the source highlights this incredible historical example involving British cycling. For decades, the British cycling team was, well, to put it mildly, they were totally irrelevant.
They were historically terrible.
Right. They had won almost nothing on the world stage. They were so bad that top bicycle manufacturers actually refused to sell them gear.
Because they thought it would hurt their brand image to be associated with the British team. Think about how bad you have to be for a company to refuse your money.
Exactly. That level of institutional failure is fascinating because it forces a complete teardown of the system. Enter Dave Brailsford, the new performance director.
And Brailsford didn't come in and look for one massive revolutionary improvement. He wasn't looking for a silver bullet.
No.
Instead, he applied this philosophy of the aggregation of marginal gains. He broke down every single component that goes into riding a bicycle. His goal was to improve each of those tiny components by just 1%.
The microscopic level of detail they focused on, it's what blows my mind every time I read this. They weren't just looking at the aerodynamics of the bike frames, which is what you'd expect.
Right, the obvious stuff.
They redesigned the actual bike seats to be 1% more comfortable so the riders could sit in an optimal posture longer. They rubbed a specific type of alcohol on the tires for 1% better grip on the asphalt.
They tested different massage gels to see which one led to the 1% faster muscle recovery rate.
They even went beyond the physical act of cycling. They brought their own specific, ergonomically tested pillows and mattresses to hotels when they traveled.
Just to ensure a 1% better night of sleep.
Yeah. They painted the inside of the team truck stark white so they could spot tiny specks of dust that might degrade the finely tuned mechanics of the bikes.
Individually, any one of these changes is entirely invisible. You would never, ever notice a 1% difference in tire grip or a slightly better pillow on a single Tuesday afternoon training ride.
But that's the secret, right? When you aggregate hundreds of these 1% improvements, the compounding effect is explosive. The source notes that within just a few years of implementing this system, British cycling absolutely dominated the Olympic Games.
They won a staggering percentage of the gold medals available.
And they went on to win the Tour de France year after year. It completely rewrote the history of the sport.
And this brings us to the core mathematical truth that you need to internalize. If you get just 1% better each day for 1 year, you don't just get 365% better.
Because of the compounding.
Exactly. Because of compounding, you end up 37 times better by the time you're done. Conversely, and this is the terrifying part, if you get 1% worse each day for 1 year, you'll decline almost all the way down to 0.
But here's where we run into a major problem, and I struggle with this myself. Human psychology makes this mathematical reality incredibly hard to grasp.
Oh, definitely.
We just don't notice a 1% shift.
Yeah.
If I eat a salad today for lunch instead of a burger, I don't look in the mirror tonight and see a fitness model. There is no immediate feedback.
That cognitive blind spot is exactly why people quit. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to notice stark, immediate contrast.
Like a threat.
Right. Our survival depended on noticing the sudden, violent movement of a predator in the bushes, not the grass growing a millimeter taller over the course of a week. Because a 1% improvement is invisible in the moment, we dismiss it.
We exist in what the source calls the valley of disappointment.
Yes, you put in the work, you make the 1% changes, but you don't see the results immediately because the compounding hasn't crossed the threshold of visibility yet.
I think about this in the context of modern remote work. Let's say you're working remotely from your apartment in Chicago. If you make a 1% shift, say waking up just 10 minutes earlier one morning to organize your digital workspace, clear your desktop, and physically write down your top 3 priorities for the day.
Your career doesn't magically skyrocket that afternoon.
No. You don't log off at 5 p.m. with a sudden promotion. It feels like a wasted effort.
It feels wasted because the brain is demanding an immediate return on investment. But if you execute that 1% behavioral shift every single workday for 3 years, what happens?
The compounded clarity.
The compounding reduction in daily decision fatigue. The compounding trust you build with your team because you are consistently hitting your prioritized targets. That fundamentally changes your professional trajectory.
The same logic applies to our financial habits. Skipping a $5 coffee and routing it into an index fund today doesn't make you a millionaire tomorrow. It feels utterly insignificant. But 3 decades of that invisible 1% financial decision fundamentally alters your socioeconomic reality. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Chapter 2 of The Source introduces a massive paradigm shift because up until now, we've just been talking about the math of habits and the actions themselves.
Right.
But The Source argues that it's not just about what you do, it's about how those habits relate to your core self-image. We have to move away from outcome-based habits and move toward identity-based habits.
What's fascinating here is that this is perhaps the most profound psychological pivot in the entire framework. Most people start the process of changing their behavior by focusing heavily on what they want to achieve.
The outcome.
Exactly, the outcome. They say, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to write a novel, or I want to save $10,000. But the source makes a highly compelling argument that true, sustainable behavior change is actually identity change.
You shouldn't be obsessing over the outcome you want to achieve.
No, you need to focus entirely on who you wish to become.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Isn't there a massive danger of fake it till you make it delusion here?
How do you mean?
Well, if I've never run a mile in my life, and I look in the mirror and tell myself, I am an athlete, my brain knows I'm lying. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. How does the framework suggest we bridge that gap without just lying to ourselves?
That is the exact trap, and it's a brilliant question. The framework doesn't suggest you stand in front of a mirror and chant affirmations that you don't believe.
Yeah.
Identity isn't a delusion. It is an evidence-based conclusion.
Okay.
The source explains that your identity emerges out of your habits. Every action you take is essentially a vote for the type of person you wish to become.
Ah, casting votes. I love that concept.
Exactly. When you first say, I am a runner, your brain might reject it. But if you put on your running shoes and walk around the block for 5 minutes, you just cast a vote for the identity of a runner.
You do it again the next day. Another vote.
You are slowly accumulating evidence. Think about a person living in Austin, Texas, who decides they want to get healthier. If they tell their coworkers, I'm trying to run a 5K, that is an outcome-based statement.
Right. They are fundamentally a person who is not a runner, who is trying to achieve the outcome of finishing a race. The habit feels like a chore.
It's a heavy obligation piled on top of their current non-athletic identity.
They are fighting their own self-image every time they step on the treadmill.
But if they shift that internal narrative to, I am a runner, and they begin casting tiny daily votes to prove it to themselves, eventually the balance of evidence shifts. When your behavior and your identity are fully aligned, you are no longer pursuing behavior change.
You are simply acting like the type of person you already believe yourself to be.
A true runner doesn't have to agonize over whether to go for a jog on a Tuesday morning. Going for a jog is just what a runner does. Your daily habits become the undeniable evidence that proves your new identity.
That concept of casting a vote is incredibly freeing because it completely relieves the pressure of needing to be perfect. You don't need unanimous votes to win an election. You just need a majority.
Right.
If you have a chaotic day where you slip up, eat junk food, skip the gym, and sleep in, you haven't permanently destroyed your identity. You just cast one single vote for the old you. The goal isn't absolute perfection.
The goal is simply to cast more votes for the new you over the long haul.
That's the beauty of it. It builds resilience. And this naturally leads us into Chapter 3, which provides the underlying neurological architecture for how we actually go about casting those votes efficiently.
The source breaks down the feedback loop that governs literally all human behavior. It is a 4-step, continuous neurological cycle: cue, craving, response, and reward.
Let's unpack this loop deeply, because if you understand this, you understand the engine of your entire life. Cue, craving, response, reward.
To understand this, we have to look at how the brain processes information. The cue is the trigger. It is a piece of information that predicts a reward.
Our brains are prediction machines.
Constantly scanning both our internal state and our external environment for hints of where rewards are located. Then, the craving is the motivational force behind the habit. What's absolutely crucial to understand here, and what most people get it wrong, is that you do not crave the habit itself.
You crave the change in state it delivers.
Precisely.
Right. No one actually craves the physical sensation of inhaling burning tobacco smoke from a cigarette. They crave the physiological feeling of relief and the dopamine release it provides.
You don't crave turning on the television and staring at glowing pixels. You crave the emotional state of being entertained or distracted from a stressful workday.
Then the craving leads to the response.
Which is the actual habit you perform. This can be a physical action or a mental thought. Whether a response occurs depends entirely on a calculation your brain makes. How motivated are you, and how much friction is associated with the behavior?
And finally, the reward.
The reward is the end goal. We chase rewards because they serve 2 purposes. They satisfy our cravings, and they teach our brains which actions are worth remembering for the future.
Cue, craving, response, reward. And what the source does so brilliantly here is it takes this somewhat abstract neurological loop and flips it into a highly practical toolkit, creating what it calls the 4 laws of behavior change.
It's almost like a control panel for your life.
Exactly. To build a good habit, you need to pull 4 levers. Make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response easy, and make the reward satisfying.
And if you have a terrible habit you want to eradicate, you just push the levers in the opposite direction.
Make the cue invisible, make the craving unattractive, make the response difficult, and make the reward unsatisfying.
That is the complete blueprint. It's a continuous chain. If a behavior is broken or insufficient at any of those 4 stages, it will not become a habit.
Eliminate the cue, and your habit will never even start.
Reduce the craving, and you won't experience enough internal motivation to act. Make the behavior difficult, and you simply won't have the energy to do it.
And if the reward fails to satisfy your desire, then your brain won't record it as a useful strategy, and you'll have no reason to do it again in the future.
It makes so much sense when you see the underlying machinery.
Really quickly before we jump into the next part, please remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode for more updates, and let's continue to the next section. Let's get into the granular details of how we manipulate these levers.
Moving to part 2.
Right. Part 2 of our source material covers the first law, make it obvious. This section focuses entirely on the cue stage of the habit loop, dealing with awareness, visibility, and the overwhelming, often invisible power of our physical environment.
The discussion of awareness in Chapter 4 starts with an incredible medical anecdote about a woman who literally saved her father-in-law's life because of her deep internalized habits.
She worked as a paramedic, right?
She did. She was at a casual family gathering, looked at her father-in-law, and instantly knew, just from a subtle shift in the color and texture of his skin, that he was suffering from a major cardiac event and needed to go to the hospital immediately.
And what's wild is that she didn't consciously analyze his symptoms. She didn't pull out a checklist. Her brain had internalized the visual cues of heart failure so deeply through years of repetition that it was entirely automatic.
Our brains are essentially supercomputers, constantly absorbing and categorizing cues without our conscious awareness.
That automaticity is a marvel of human evolution. It allows us to navigate complex environments without being paralyzed by conscious decision-making.
But it is a double-edged sword. It is wonderful for experienced paramedics, but it is disastrous for trying to curb bad habits.
Oh, totally. Think about how often you mindlessly reach for a snack when you're stressed.
Or how automatically you pull your phone out of your pocket the second you step into an elevator. You aren't consciously choosing to do these things. You aren't weighing the pros and cons. You are just reacting blindly to invisible cues.
Therefore, the absolute first step to changing your habits is to force those invisible cues back into the light of conscious awareness. You can't fix what you can't see.
To do that, the source introduces a fascinating technique borrowed from the Japanese railway system. It's called pointing and calling, or shisakenko.
If you watch train operators in Japan, they physically point at different objects in the cabin and on the tracks, and they call out their status aloud.
They point at the signal light and declare, "Signal is green." They point at the speedometer and say, "Speed is 80."
From an outside perspective, it looks almost absurd. Why would a highly trained professional need to point at a speedometer?
But the data is staggering. This simple system reduces errors by up to 85% and cuts accidents by 30%.
Why?
Because it forces the brain to move out of the default mode network, that unconscious automation, and engages the prefrontal cortex. It demands conscious, present-moment awareness.
I decided to try this myself after reading the source material, and it is startlingly effective. If you want to cut back on eating junk food and you find yourself mechanically walking into the kitchen and reaching for a bag of potato chips.
You literally point at them.
Yes, you physically point at the chips and say out loud to an empty room, "I am about to eat these chips. I am not actually hungry, I am just bored, and eating these is going to make me feel sluggish in 20 minutes.
Hearing yourself vocalize the action shatters the illusion. It dramatically increases the psychological friction of performing the bad habit because you can no longer pretend you aren't doing it. You are forcing your brain to acknowledge the reality of your actions in real time.
So once we have awareness of our current cues, how do we create new ones? Chapter 5 gives us a formula for this called an implementation intention, and more specifically, habit stacking. The formula is beautifully simple, almost deceptive. After current habit, I will new habit.
It sounds simple, but it is deeply rooted in how our neurology operates. Specifically, Hebb's law, which states that neurons that fire together wire together.
When you try to build a brand new habit from scratch, you are essentially trying to forge a new neural pathway through a dense jungle in your brain. It takes a massive amount of cognitive energy.
But you already have thousands of deeply ingrained habits, neurological superhighways that have been paved and reinforced over years. Things you do every single day without fail, like brushing your teeth, pouring your morning coffee, turning on the shower, or locking your front door.
Habit stacking allows you to hitch a ride on those superhighways. You anchor a fragile new habit to a robust pre-existing habit.
Let's look at a practical example. Since you, the listener, are likely well-versed in the basics of productivity, let's talk about the habit of daily mindfulness or meditation, which a lot of high performers struggle to integrate.
If you just vaguely tell yourself, "I'm going to try to meditate more this week," you are almost guaranteed to fail. It's too abstract. There is no cue to trigger the behavior.
But if you utilize habit stacking, you create a concrete anchor. After I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 2 minutes.
In that scenario, pouring the coffee is the cue. It's a reliable event that happens every single morning. You don't need to set an alarm on your phone. You just need the coffee pot to finish brewing.
You are leveraging the existing momentum of the old habit to carry you effortlessly into the new habit, and you can chain these behaviors together to create highly efficient routines.
Like, after I pour my coffee, I will meditate for 2 minutes. After I meditate, I will write down my top 3 tasks for the day. After I write down my tasks, I will immediately open the document for my first project.
You are building a seamless chain reaction where the completion of one behavior acts as the automatic, undeniable cue for the next.
But what happens when our environment is actively fighting against those cues? That brings us to chapters 6 and 7, which tackle a really pervasive cultural myth, the idea that motivation and willpower are the most important factors for success.
The source argues that motivation is highly overrated, and your environment matters exponentially more.
We have this deeply ingrained narrative, especially in U.S. hustle culture, that highly successful people simply possess superhuman willpower. We think they white-knuckle their way through temptation.
But the psychological research paints a completely different picture. People who appear to have extraordinarily high self-control actually just spend far less time in tempting situations.
They don't have better willpower, they have better environment.
And it's always easier to avoid temptation than to resist it.
That is a massive weight off the shoulders.
Yeah.
It's not a moral failing, it's an architectural failing.
Exactly. Consider the cognitive load of resistance. If you are sitting on the couch after a long, exhausting day, and there is a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies on the coffee table right in your line of sight.
It requires a continuous, active exertion of cognitive energy to resist eating one. Every time you look at them, your brain triggers the craving.
Your willpower is like a battery, and it will eventually deplete. But if those same cookies are in the pantry, tucked behind a closed door on a high shelf, the visual cue is eliminated. The craving isn't constantly triggered.
We are overwhelmingly visual creatures. A huge percentage of our brain's sensory cortex is dedicated just to processing visual information. If your environment is designed to make the cues for bad habits glaringly obvious and the cues for good habits hidden, you are fighting a losing battle.
Let's apply this to a standard U.S. kitchen setup. Think about how most people organize their refrigerators.
Oh, this is so true.
They take the healthiest food they buy, the apples, the spinach, the fresh produce, and they hide it away in the crisper drawer at the very bottom, completely out of sight.
Meanwhile, they leave a brightly colored box of processed crackers sitting right on the kitchen counter. You walk into the kitchen, your visual cortex registers the crackers, it triggers the dopamine craving, and you eat them.
To fix this, you don't need to read another book on discipline. You just apply the first law of behavior change. Make it obvious for the good habits, and the inversion of the first law, make it invisible for the bad habits.
You redesign the architecture of your choices. Take the apples out of the hidden drawer and put them in a beautiful, prominent bowl right in the center of the kitchen island.
Take the crackers and put them in an opaque container on the highest shelf in the back of the pantry. You want to make the right choice. The path of least resistance and the wrong choice require deliberate effort to uncover.
Our smartphones are the ultimate, terrifying example of this. How many of us suffer from chronic doom scrolling?
Almost everyone.
You sit down at your desk, determined to do an hour of deep, focused work, but your phone is sitting right next to your keyboard, screen facing up. The cue is glaringly obvious. Every time the screen lights up with a notification, your brain's dopamine pathways are hijacked.
If you want to stop doom scrolling during work hours, you do not need more willpower. You need a better environment. You put the phone in another room, you put it in a desk drawer, you make the cue invisible.
Environment design allows you to reclaim your agency. You shift from being the victim of your surroundings to being the architect of them.
If you want to practice the guitar more, do not leave the guitar in its case, zipped up in the back of the guest room closet. Buy a cheap stand and put the guitar right in the middle of your living room.
If you want to drink more water, don't rely on remembering to go to the kitchen. Fill up a massive water bottle every morning and place it right next to your computer screen so it is physically in your peripheral vision all day. The visual cue must be unavoidable.
That's the essence of the first law.
And before we dive into the next piece of this, please like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's continue to the next section. Because if the first law is about making the cue visible in our physical space, how do we handle the internal space? How do we make the habit actually feel worth doing?
That brings us to part 3. The second law, make it attractive.
This section delves into the neurobiology of craving, the role of dopamine, and the massive influence of our social circles. Let's start with dopamine.
Since you are likely well-versed in the basics of dopamine as a reward chemical, let's skip past the introductory definitions and get straight to the source's most crucial counterintuitive pivot. Most people think dopamine is released when you get a reward.
You eat the chocolate, you feel pleasure, that's dopamine.
But neuroscientists have discovered that dopamine is actually released in anticipation of a reward. It is not the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of desire, craving, and motivation.
That anticipation factor changes everything. Think about planning a vacation. Often, spending weeks looking at travel blogs, booking the hotel, and imagining the trip provides a massive, sustained spike in dopamine that is sometimes even higher than actually being on the trip itself.
Which might involve delayed flights or bad weather. The craving is what actually drives the action.
So the question becomes, how do we engineer that anticipation for habits we naturally resist? The source introduces a highly effective strategy called temptation bundling.
This leverages a psychological concept known as Premack's principle, which states that more probable behaviors will reinforce less probable behaviors.
In plain English, you pair an action you want to do with an action you need to do.
You are essentially using the high dopamine anticipation of a reward to pull you through a difficult, high-friction task. You attach a low dopamine task, like exercising or doing administrative paperwork, to a high dopamine task, like watching a favorite TV show or listening to a specific podcast.
The classic, somewhat extreme example from the text is an engineering student who knew he needed to exercise but really just wanted to watch Netflix. So he used his skills to wire his stationary bike to his television, writing a program that would only allow Netflix to play if he was pedaling above a certain RPM.
If he slowed down, the show paused.
I love the ingenuity of that, but we can translate that to a much more accessible everyday example. Let's say you're absolutely obsessed with a specific true crime podcast here in the US.
People love their true crime.
They really do. You wait all week for the new episode to drop, and you usually listen to it while lounging on the couch. But you also know you desperately need to get to the gym more often.
You create a strict, unbreakable temptation bundle. I am only allowed to listen to my true crime podcast while I am physically inside the gym.
By creating that rule, you completely alter the psychological landscape of going to the gym. Suddenly, going to the gym becomes attractive. You are actually looking forward to the treadmill because it is the only place you are allowed to find out who the killer is.
You have artificially attached a high level of anticipatory dopamine to a task you previously dreaded.
But personal hacks like temptation bundling are only part of the equation. Chapter 9 zooms out and looks at the macro environment, the power of the tribe.
This is where we get into evolutionary psychology. We are deeply, fundamentally social creatures. For hundreds of thousands of years, our survival depended entirely on staying within the good graces of the tribe.
If you were cast out of the tribe, you couldn't survive alone. You died.
Therefore, we have a deeply ingrained neurological imperative to fit in, to belong, and to conform to the norms of our group. The source summarizes this perfectly. One of the most effective things you can do to build better habits is to join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior.
This is profound because it explains why so many of our individual efforts fail. If you are surrounded by a friend group that constantly eats fast food, complains bitterly about their jobs, and spends every weekend binge-watching television,
Trying to suddenly eat healthy, start a side business, and read nonfiction is going to feel like a monumental uphill battle.
you are fighting against the gravitational pull of your entire social environment. Every time you try to practice your new positive habit, you feel like an outsider. You are essentially risking social friction to improve yourself.
Conversely, if you want to become a runner, joining a local running club transforms the habit from a lonely, agonizing struggle into a social bonding experience.
When you join that club, running 5 miles on a Saturday morning isn't a chore. It's just what we do.
It's the baseline expectation. You want to find a tribe where your desired behavior is the normal behavior, and, crucially, where you already have something else in common with the group. That shared identity makes the new habits incredibly attractive, because performing the habit reinforces your belonging to the tribe.
And the beauty of the modern world is that our tribes aren't just the people we happen to live next door to anymore. They are the digital communities we curate. Think about fitness platforms or language learning communities online.
When you immerse yourself in those digital spaces, you are normalizing the behavior you want to adopt.
But what about the habits we want to break? Chapter 10 covers the inversion of the second law, make it unattractive. How do we reprogram our brains to find our deeply ingrained bad habits repulsive?
This requires a deliberate cognitive reframing. Bad habits always provide some sort of superficial benefit, a moment of stress relief, a distraction, a quick hit of sugar. To make them unattractive, you have to consciously, aggressively highlight the negative impacts until the association changes.
The source talks about reframing your internal narrative. It's essentially cognitive behavioral therapy applied to daily habits.
Instead of looking at a plate of pastries and saying, oh, I have to restrict myself, I can't eat that, which implies you're being deprived of something valuable, you reframe it.
You say, I am choosing to nourish my body with real food because eating processed sugar makes me feel lethargic, ruins my focus for the afternoon, and disrupts my sleep.
It's about dismantling the belief that the bad habit is actually serving you. A really poignant example from the source focuses on how we consume digital information, specifically avoiding negative online influences.
If you are addicted to reading angry political debates on social media, you have likely associated that behavior with feeling informed or feeling a sense of righteous tribal validation.
To make it unattractive, you have to brutally reframe it. Endlessly scrolling through these online arguments isn't making me an informed citizen. It is chronically spiking my cortisol levels, it's ruining my mood, and it is stealing precious hours I could be spending with my family.
Once you truly deeply associate the habit with a negative physical and emotional state, the craving begins to wither. That cognitive reframing is essential. You must convince your brain that the short-term hit is not worth the long-term cost. Once again, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's continue to the next part. Moving forward, we enter part 4. The third, make it easy.
This section covers chapters 11 through 14, and it addresses the response phase of the habit loop. This is all about friction, energy conservation, and understanding how action actually occurs in the real world.
Chapter 11 introduces a trap that I think is arguably the most common pitfall for high achievers. It is the crucial difference between being in motion and taking action.
Okay, let's unpack this difference, because when I first read this, I felt personally attacked.
It was a huge blind spot for me too.
Motion is when you are busy doing something, usually planning or strategizing. But that task will never, on its own, produce an outcome. Action is the specific behavior that actually delivers the result.
It is a critical distinction that often masks procrastination. Let's say your goal is to write a novel. Spending 3 weeks researching how to outline a novel, buying a fancy new mechanical keyboard, watching YouTube videos about character arcs, and joining a writer's forum.
All of that is motion. It feels incredibly productive. It gives you the dopamine hit of feeling a writer. But you could stay in motion for 10 years and never have a finished book.
Actually opening a blank document, sitting at the keyboard, and typing a paragraph, that is action.
We get stuck in motion because it is safe. Motion protects us from the very real possibility of failure. If I am just researching different weightlifting routines, I can't be bad at lifting weights. Haven't risked anything.
But the framework argues emphatically that you cannot build a habit through motion. You cannot strategize your way into automaticity. Repetition, not time, is what builds a habit.
People constantly ask the wrong question. They ask, how long does it take to build a new habit? Is the myth true that it takes 21 days? Or is it 66 days?
The source points out that this fundamentally misunderstands neuroplasticity.
It's not about the passage of time, it's about the frequency of repetitions. You could perform a behavior once a week for a year, and it might still feel awkward and unnatural.
Conversely, you could do something 3 times a day for a month, and it becomes deeply ingrained in your basal ganglia. Every single repetition physically strengthens the neural pathways associated with that behavior. The focus must be on getting your reps in, not marking days off a calendar.
And how do we ensure we actually get those repetitions in when life gets chaotic? That brings us to Chapter 12, the law of least effort.
We have to look at this through an evolutionary lens. Human beings are fundamentally wired to conserve energy. When calories were scarce on the savannah, wasting physical or cognitive energy on unnecessary tasks could quite literally be fatal.
So our brains are constantly subconsciously calculating friction. If a new habit requires a massive expenditure of energy, multiple complex steps, or heavy decision-making, we are highly unlikely to do it.
Our brains will naturally gravitate toward the option that requires the least amount of work. The third law, make it easy, is often misunderstood. It is not about doing easy, trivial things.
It is about making it as frictionless as possible to do the difficult things that pay off in the long run. You must ruthlessly audit your environment to minimize the friction associated with good habits.
Let's walk through a highly relatable morning routine here in the US. Say your goal is to go to the gym before work. If your alarm goes off at 5:30 a.m., it is dark and you are tired.
If you have to get out of bed, go to your closet, mentally decide which workout shirt to wear, dig through a drawer to find matching socks, and then go to the living room to locate your shoes.
That is a massive amount of cognitive and physical friction. Your tired brain will calculate all those steps, realize the energy expenditure is too high, and rationalize just staying in bed.
But if you practice the law of least effort, you eliminate that friction the night before. You lay out your gym clothes, your shoes, your car keys, and your water bottle right next to the bedroom door.
You have removed all the decision-making friction. When the alarm goes off, you literally just have to step into the clothes and walk out the door. The path of least resistance now leads directly to the gym.
And we apply the inversion of the third law for bad habits. Make it difficult. If you want to stop mindlessly watching 3 hours of television every night, you don't just rely on willpower. You add friction.
Unplug the television from the wall after you turn it off. Take the batteries out of the remote control and put them in a drawer in the kitchen.
The next evening, when you feel the urge to veg out, the added friction of having to physically find the batteries, put them in, and plug the TV back in is often just enough of a pause to break the automatic cycle and make you realize you'd rather read a book.
Adding a few seconds of friction can be the difference between succumbing to a craving and overcoming it. This philosophy of reducing friction for good habits leads perfectly into Chapter 13, which offers one of the most deceptively simple yet powerful pieces of advice in the entire framework: the 2-minute rule.
The rule states, when you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do.
I have to admit, when I first read about the 2-minute rule, I thought it was almost a joke. It feels patronizing. If my goal is to run a marathon, scaling my habit down to tying my running shoes feels absurd. How does doing something for 120 seconds actually bypass our procrastination triggers?
It feels absurd because you are focusing on the physical output of the 2 minutes rather than the neurological rewiring taking place. The 2-minute rule is designed to combat the overwhelming friction of big goals.
When we set goals, we envision the finished product. I am going to read 50 books this year. I am going to work out for an hour every day.
The brain looks at that hour of strenuous exercise, feels overwhelmed, and triggers procrastination. The 2-minute rule forces you to scale the habit down to its absolute simplest foundational gateway behavior.
So read 50 books becomes read one single page before bed. Do an hour of yoga becomes unroll my yoga mat on the living room floor.
Exactly. The secret here, and this is vital, is that the goal is not actually to do 1 minute of work. The goal is to master the habit of showing up. You cannot optimize a habit that does not exist yet. You have to establish the standardized behavior first before you can expand and improve it.
The art of showing up, that is such a crucial reframe. If you can't master the seemingly trivial art of putting on your running shoes every single day, you are never going to master the art of running a 10K. You are standardizing the very beginning of the process.
And what usually happens is that once you tie your shoes, the hardest part, the initiation friction, is over. The psychological momentum often carries you forward.
You think, well, my shoes are on, I'm already outside, I might as well walk around the block. But even if you strictly adhere to the rule, tie your shoes, and then take them off, you have still succeeded. You have cast a vital vote for your identity as someone who shows up consistently.
Chapter 14 takes this concept of guaranteeing action a step further by discussing commitment devices and the power of automation. This is about making good habits inevitable and bad habits impossible by making decisive choices up front that lock in your future behavior.
What exactly is a commitment device?
A commitment device is a choice you make in the present moment when your rational, long-term thinking brain is in charge that controls or restricts your actions in the future when you know your emotional short-term brain will be tempted.
It is the modern equivalent of the Ulysses Pact from Greek mythology, where Ulysses had his crew tie him to the mast of the ship so he could hear the siren song without being able to steer the ship into the rock.
In our modern digital landscape, we have incredible tools for this. If you know you get endlessly distracted by social media while trying to do deep work, you don't rely on hoping you'll have good discipline tomorrow.
You use a commitment device. You install an app blocker that physically prevents your computer from accessing certain websites between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. You have automated the good habit of focus. You tied yourself to the mast.
Or consider financial habits, which we touched on earlier. If you want to save a portion of your income, you don't wait until the end of the month, look at your checking account, and hope there is money left over to transfer to savings.
There never is.
Instead, You set up an automatic transfer with your bank so that 10% of your paycheck is instantly routed to an investment account the day you get paid, before you ever see it or have the chance to spend it.
You make the good habit inevitable by removing yourself from the decision-making process entirely. Automation is the ultimate manifestation of make it easy, because once it is set up, it requires zero ongoing effort.
That brings us perfectly to the next section.
But first, remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode for more updates, and let's continue to the next part. We're now in part 5. The fourth law, make it satisfying. This encompasses chapters 15 through 17 and deals with the final stage, the reward phase of the habit loop.
You've made the cue obvious, the craving attractive, and the response easy. Now, this final law determines whether your brain will actually decide to repeat the behavior tomorrow.
Chapter 15 establishes the cardinal rule of behavior change. It is a fundamental law of operant conditioning. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. The absolute most critical word in that sentence is immediately.
And this highlights a massive evolutionary mismatch between how our brains evolved and the modern society we live in. For the vast majority of human history, we lived in what anthropologists call an immediate return environment.
If you were hungry, you foraged for berries, you ate them, and your hunger was immediately satiated. If a storm rolled in, you found shelter, and you were immediately protected. Every action had an instant consequence.
Our brains evolved over millions of years to heavily prioritize immediate rewards because that is what kept us alive in the wild. But today, we live in a completely different paradigm, a delayed return environment.
Almost all the choices we make today do not have an immediate payoff. You go to work today, but you don't get a paycheck for 2 weeks.
You endure a grueling workout at the gym today, but you don't see an improvement in your physique for months. You meticulously save money today for a retirement that might be 30 or 40 years in the future.
So we have ancient brains operating in a modern environment. It means that our neurology is naturally wired to resist the very habits that are best for our long-term flourishing, simply because the reward is too far away to register on our evolutionary radar.
Think about eating a donut. The reward, a massive euphoric sugar high, is immediate. The consequence, weight gain and sluggishness, is delayed. The brain chooses the donut.
But if you go for a run, the consequence, sore muscles, shortness of breath, sweating, is immediate. The reward, better cardiovascular health and a longer life, is delayed. The brain resists the run.
The human brain heavily discounts the future in favor of the present moment. Therefore, if you want a positive habit to stick, you have to hack this system. You have to find a way to artificially attach an immediate sense of pleasure or satisfaction to the end of the behavior.
The completion of the habit must feel good right now. Chapter 16 gives us a brilliant, tactile tool for creating that immediate reward, habit tracking. This is the simple act of visually recording whether you did your habit or not, like putting a big red X on a wall calendar every day you practice the guitar.
Habit tracking is incredibly powerful because it simultaneously fulfills multiple laws of behavior change. First, it makes it obvious. Seeing a physical calendar on your wall provides a clear, unavoidable visual cue.
Second, it makes it attractive. It leverages our natural desire to complete patterns. You see a streak of 5 red X's, and you are highly motivated not to break the chain.
And third, it makes it satisfying. The simple physical act of crossing off a day on a calendar or checking a box in a digital productivity app provides an immediate, tangible hit of dopamine.
It feels inherently good to record a success. You might not see the physical results of your workout today, but you get the immediate satisfaction of checking the box.
We see this principle engineered into almost all modern technology. Look at language learning apps with their burning streak counters, or smartwatches with their daily activity rings. Closing those rings or extending a 100-day streak is deeply satisfying to the human brain.
But importantly, the source material also offers a crucial, forgiving golden rule for habit tracking: never miss twice.
I think this is the most compassionate and realistic piece of advice in the whole book. Never miss twice. It acts as a vital psychological safety net.
Because let's be real, life is unpredictable. You will get the flu, you will have an unexpected family emergency, you will have to stay late at work, and you will inevitably miss a day of your perfectly planned habit. Perfection is an illusion.
The danger isn't missing one day. Missing one day has almost zero statistical impact on your long-term progress. The true danger is the cascade effect. That missing one day makes you feel like a failure, which spirals into missing a week, a month, and eventually abandoning the habit entirely.
Never miss twice is a pre-commitment. It acknowledges that if you drop the ball today, your absolute non-negotiable highest priority tomorrow is to pick it back up. The first mistake is never the one that ruins you, it is the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows.
It takes the guilt and shame out of the equation and replaces it with immediate, focused action for the next day.
But what if we need a little more pressure? What if the positive reinforcement isn't enough? Chapter 17 covers the inversion of the fourth law, make it unsatisfying. How do we make the failure to perform our habits immediately painful?
The source suggests utilizing accountability partners and formal habit contracts. Just as we discussed the power of the social tribe in making habits attractive, we can use that same social pressure in reverse to make bad habits deeply unsatisfying.
We are highly averse to losing social standing or disappointing others. If you simply promise yourself you are going to wake up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym, and the alarm goes off and you hit snooze, the only person who knows is you. The cost is entirely internal and very low.
But if you have an accountability partner, a friend waiting for you in the freezing cold outside the gym at 6 a.m. hitting snooze, means you are leaving them stranded.
The immediate social cost is agonizing. The abstract failure of not working out becomes the immediate, painful reality of being a bad friend.
You can even formalize this dynamic with a habit contract. You literally write down your specific commitment, you specify a painful punishment if you fail, and you have someone else sign it to hold you to it.
Like, if I don't write 500 words of my thesis every day this week, I have to pay my accountability partner $50.
Loss aversion is a powerful motivator. Suddenly, the vague, delayed consequence of falling behind on your thesis is replaced by the immediate, highly tangible pain of losing $50 from your wallet.
It forces the delayed consequences of bad habits into the present moment, making them impossible for your brain to ignore.
Exactly. It aligns your short-term incentives with your long-term goals.
Once again, remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode for more updates. Now we are moving into the final section, Part 6, Advanced Tactics from Good to Great.
These final chapters, 18 through 20, look beyond the basic day-to-day mechanics and explore how to optimize your systems over a lifetime. It explores some nuanced and, frankly, slightly controversial topics that a lot of self-help literature ignores.
Yes, Chapter 18 dives into the truth about talent, exploring when genes matter and when they don't. This is a vital pivot because so much of the modern self-improvement world pushes this hyper-egalitarian narrative that anyone can be anything if they just work hard enough or hustle long enough.
But the source material takes a much more realistic, scientifically grounded approach. It acknowledges the biological reality that our genetics do play a significant role in determining our baseline potential in specific areas.
The classic example. If you are 5'4", you are highly unlikely to become a starting center in the NBA, regardless of how meticulously you optimize your basketball habits. Your genes do not determine your ultimate destiny, but they absolutely determine your areas of greatest opportunity.
The secret to long-term success is to choose habits and pursuits that align with your natural genetic strengths. It's about playing a game where the odds are inherently in your favor.
Psychologists often look at the big five personality traits like extroversion, conscientiousness, and openness to experience, which have strong genetic underpinnings. If you are naturally highly introverted, trying to build a career habit around high-energy, high-volume networking events is going to be incredibly friction-heavy. It will drain you constantly.
But building a habit around deep, solitary research, coding, or writing might be entirely aligned with your natural disposition. You want to pursue the habits that feel like play to you, but look like grueling work to others.
When you align your habits with your natural inclinations, the third law, make it easy, happens almost automatically. The inherent friction is just lower. But once you find that alignment and successfully build the habit, how do you keep from getting bored?
Chapter 19 introduces the Goldilocks rule, which is all about finding the optimal challenge zone to maintain motivation and achieve what psychologists call a flow state.
The Goldilocks rule is based on the Yerkes-Dodson law of arousal. Human beings experience peak motivation when working on tasks that are right on the edge of their current abilities. Not too hard, not too easy, just right.
Think about playing a competitive sport like tennis. If you play a match against a 4-year-old child, it is far too easy. You will win every single point without trying, and you will be completely bored.
If you play against a Grand Slam champion, it is far too hard. You will lose every point, you won't even be able to return a serve, and you will be completely demoralized. In both scenarios, your motivation plummets.
But if you play against someone who is your exact equal, where you win some points and lose some points, where you have to stretch yourself just a little bit beyond your comfort zone to secure the victory, that is when you enter a flow state.
Your focus narrows entirely to the present moment, time seems to fade away, and you are completely blissfully engaged. To maintain a habit over years, you must constantly tweak the difficulty of the task to stay balanced on that razor's edge.
If a habit becomes too easy, you stop paying attention to it. And that leads directly to the primary danger outlined in Chapter 20. The downside of habits. This is perhaps the most surprising and sobering chapter in the entire text.
We have spent this entire deep dive talking about how incredible and necessary habits are, but the source issues a stark warning. Habits can actually create rigid, dangerous ruts.
Wait, how could a good habit become a bad thing? Let me clarify what the source says. The massive benefit of a habit is that you can do things without thinking. It frees up cognitive load.
But the massive downside of a habit is exactly the same. You get used to doing things a certain way and you stop thinking. You stop paying attention to small errors.
When a behavior becomes fully automated in the basal ganglia, you stop actively improving it. You just go through the motions.
The source points out a terrifying reality in the medical field. A doctor who has been practicing for 20 years might actually be worse at diagnosing certain rare conditions than a recent medical school graduate.
Why? Because the older doctor is relying on automated, habitual heuristics and is no longer critically analyzing every new piece of information with a beginner's mind.
That makes total sense, and we see it in everyday life. We see this in career trajectories constantly. Someone gets a new job in the U.S. corporate world. They work hard to figure out the specific habits required to be good enough at their role, and once they hit that baseline of competence, they just coast on autopilot for the next 10 years.
They mistake a decade of genuine experience for 1 year of experience simply repeated 10 times.
The same tragic thing happens in long-term relationships. You develop habits for how you greet your partner, how you handle conflicts, how you spend your evenings, and eventually the automation takes over and you stop actively listening and engaging. You are just running a neurological script.
To combat this inevitable slide into complacency, the source emphasizes the absolute necessity of regular review and reflection. You cannot just build your systems and then blindly trust them forever. You need to build a meta-habit. The habit of reviewing your habits.
Many highly successful people implement an annual or semi-annual review. They sit down, look objectively at their daily routines, and ask hard questions. Are these habits still serving the identity I want to embody today? Have my goals shifted? Have I plateaued in my skills? Where am I making lazy, automatic errors?
It's the difference between simple experience and deliberate practice. Habits plus deliberate practice equals true mastery. If you just have the habit without the conscious reflection, you just end up with deep-seated complacency.
You have to remain the conscious architect of your life, not just a passenger on the automated tracks you laid down 5 years ago.
Precisely. The evolution of your personal systems must be a continuous, lifelong process of refinement.
This has been an absolutely phenomenal breakdown. We've covered the entire journey through the source material, from the fundamental philosophy to the advanced tactics. Let's do a quick recap to synthesize everything we've unpacked today.
We started with the foundational truth that massive, dramatic overhauls rarely work. What works is a commitment to the aggregation of marginal gains, being just 1% better every day and allowing the math of compounding to work in your favor over time.
We learned that the ultimate goal is not to achieve an outcome, but to fundamentally shift your identity, to cast daily votes to become the type of person who embodies the change.
And to do that, we utilize the 4 laws of behavior change. To build a good habit, you make the cue obvious, you make the craving attractive, you make the response easy, and you make the reward satisfying.
To break a bad habit, you brutally invert those laws. Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. We explored practical, everyday tools like pointing and calling, habit stacking, environment design, temptation bundling, the 2-minute rule, and habit tracking to manipulate those 4 stages.
And finally, we explored the advanced tactics of aligning your habits with your natural genetic talents, using the Goldilocks rule to stay continuously engaged in a state of flow, and implementing regular conscious reviews to ensure your automated behaviors don't devolve into stagnant ruts.
Now, to move you out of the motion of just listening to us and into the action of real life, we have a quick listener challenge for you, pulled straight from the source material. We want you to pick just one habit to stack this week using the formula we discussed.
Look at your current daily morning routine. Find one reliable anchor, pouring your coffee, brushing your teeth, sitting at your desk, and attach one tiny 2-minute new habit to it.
Use the formula. After I current habit, I will new habit, write it down, make it obvious, and execute it tomorrow.
It's the perfect low-friction place to start. And as we conclude this exploration, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
I'm ready.
Throughout this entire conversation, we've focused exclusively on the individual. We've talked about how you build systems for your identity. But if we zoom out, consider this. Organizations, families, corporations, and entire societies have systems and atomic habits too.
A company culture is really nothing more than the aggregated micro habits of its employees.
Yeah.
A family dynamic is just the compounded result of daily behavioral loops.
That's a fascinating lens to view the world through. The source material clearly states that you fall to the level of your systems. So what happens when the broader culture around you, your workplace, your community, your political society, is running on automated, invisible, and deeply flawed routines?
Wow.
Once you understand the mechanics of behavior change, you have to ask yourself, are you consciously shaping your environment's habits, or are the environment's automated habits silently, relentlessly shaping you?
That is a heavy, but incredibly essential question to walk away with. You have to take conscious control of your systems, or I guarantee you, someone else's systems will take control of you. This has been an incredibly enlightening journey into the mechanics of who we are and who we can become. Thank you so much for joining us for this analysis. If you want to keep exploring these concepts, I highly encourage you to check the appendix suggestions in the source material for further reading. There is so much more to discover. Until next time, stay curious, start small, and build those systems.